Hi, welcome back to Last Day on Earth. Where are you listening from tonight? Your bed, your desk, or somewhere in between? Tonight we begin with a story that has followed humanity for more than 2,000 years, Atlantis. A city described by Plato as powerful, advanced, and proud, until it was swallowed by the sea in a single night. Was it only a warning dressed as myth, or was it the memory of a real civilization, lost to time and hidden beneath the ocean? In this series, we'll follow the legend across history and science. We'll look at Plato's words, sunken cities already discovered, the rise of oceans after the Ice Age, and the possibility of civilizations surviving in places we have never searched. Atlantis is not only a story about the past, it is a mirror, asking us questions about our own future. So take a deep breath, let the noise of the day fade, and let's step into the waters together. The journey to Atlantis begins. Chapter 1. The day Atlantis sank, or survived. Atlantis. The very word carries an echo, a sense of something lost, but never forgotten. It lingers in myths, in books, in documentaries, in the quiet fascination of anyone who has ever wondered about hidden worlds. We imagine a city of marble, gold, and knowledge, an island rich in power, swallowed by the sea in a single day. Yet what if this story is not about a past that ended, but about a presence that continues? What if Atlantis still exists, not as a ruin, not as rubble, but as a living world beneath the ocean? The story as we know it begins with Plato. Around 360 BCE, he wrote of Atlantis in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He described a mighty island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was vast, larger than Libya and Asia combined, filled with fertile land, natural resources, and a powerful navy. Its people were wealthy, ambitious, and skilled in engineering. They built concentric circles of land and water around their capital, channels and canals that made the island both defensible and prosperous. But pride led to their fall. They tried to conquer lands beyond their own, and for this arrogance, the gods punished them. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island was swallowed by the sea. Scholars have argued about these words for centuries. Was Plato describing a real place, or was he using Atlantis as an allegory, a warning about how greed and arrogance lead to collapse? Many believe it was a story, nothing more, but others suggest that Plato may have been recording fragments of history, echoes of disasters passed down through memory. If so, Atlantis may not have been a single island, but a symbol of all the places swallowed by the rising seas at the end of the last ice age. 11,000 years ago, the Earth was warming. Glaciers melted and sea levels rose more than 100 meters. Imagine the world then. Vast plains connected lands now separated by water. Britain was not an island, but part of Europe. The Persian Gulf was a valley of rivers and marshes. The Caribbean was dotted with larger islands and coastlines that now lie beneath the waves. As the seas rose, countless human settlements disappeared. People fled inland, carrying with them stories of floods and lost lands. Could Atlantis have been one of those drowned places remembered in myth, amplified through centuries, and preserved by Plato's words? Evidence suggests this might not be impossible. Off the coast of India near Dwarka, archaeologists have found submerged structures that resemble city walls and streets, now covered in silt. In the North Sea lies Doggerland, once a fertile plain where humans lived and hunted, now buried beneath cold waters. Off Japan at Yanaguni, divers have discovered stepped stone formations that look like terraces and platforms, though scientists still debate whether they are natural or human-made. Each of these sites reminds us that human history is tied to the sea, and that the ocean keeps secrets far older than our written records. But what if Atlantis did not simply vanish? What if the people of Atlantis, faced with catastrophe, found ways to survive? It is here that imagination takes hold. Perhaps they built deeper, moving underground into caverns below the ocean floor, Perhaps they tapped into geothermal heat, using it to power their cities. Perhaps they cultivated life in the dark, farming fungi, algae, or bioluminescent organisms to sustain themselves. In this vision, Atlantis did not die. It transformed, adapting to a hidden world beneath the waves. The ocean itself offers reasons to consider this possibility. More than 80% of it remains unexplored. We have mapped the surface of Mars with greater precision than the floor of our own seas. Beneath the waves lie mountains taller than the Alps, trenches deeper than Everest is high, volcanoes larger than any on land. Entire ecosystems thrive in darkness, feeding not on sunlight, but on the minerals and heat of hydrothermal vents. Creatures glow with their own light. Tubeworms, clams, and bacteria survive where pressure would crush almost anything else. If such life can flourish in places so extreme, is it impossible to imagine that humans, driven by necessity, might have learned to adapt as well? Picture the moment when Atlantis sank, the sea pouring over streets, laid out in rings, temples collapsing, statues falling, markets silenced in a rush of water. To those watching, it was the end of a world. But below, some may have survived. Caverns in the seabed may have become sanctuaries. Lava tubes and basalt chambers may have been hollowed into shelters. What was destruction on the surface may have been transformation below. A civilization reborn, unseen by those who told the story later. Even now, the mystery refuses to vanish. Divers return with images of structures too symmetrical to be entirely natural. Sonar scans reveal patterns that look like walls or roads, though buried under layers of sediment. Legends from many cultures speak of floods, lost lands, and civilizations swallowed by water. The stories of Noah, of Gilgamesh, of flood myths from Asia to the Americas. Perhaps these are not coincidences, but fragments of the same memory retold in different voices. Perhaps Plato's tale was not unique, but one thread in a tapestry of flood stories that stretch across the world. Atlantis, then, might be more than one place. It might be a symbol of every human settlement lost to rising seas, every city that vanished beneath the ocean. But if even one of them survived, if even one civilization found a way to continue below the surface, then Atlantis is not a memory at all. It is a presence, silent, hidden, waiting. Think of what that would mean. A civilization shaped by isolation, by darkness, by pressure and silence. Their technologies would not look like ours. Their energy might come from geothermal heat or from currents deep in the ocean. Their architecture would not rise toward the sky, but curve into caverns and domes. Their culture would not look upward to the stars, but inward toward the mysteries of the earth. If such a people still exist, they are not lost. They are simply hidden in the places we have not yet learned to search. Plato said Atlantis was punished for its arrogance, but maybe what looked like punishment was survival. Maybe they found a way to live beyond our sight, leaving only fragments behind for us to wonder over. Maybe the ruins we find on the ocean floor are not the remnants of the dead, but the outskirts of the living. The world we know is not the whole world. The sea is deeper than our imagination, and its silence may not be empty. The day Atlantis sank might not have been the end of its story. It might have been the beginning of another, one that continues in the shadows of the ocean. To us, it is a myth, a cautionary tale, a legend. But what if, to them, it is memory? What if Atlantis still breathes, waiting beneath the waves, unseen but not gone? Chapter 2. Echoes from Plato's Scrolls. When we talk about Atlantis, every thread leads back to one man, Plato. Without him, the word would mean nothing. There would be no endless documentaries, no feverish books, no late-night debates about lost continents. The myth rests almost entirely on his shoulders, and yet his words are not a simple tale. They are fragments, wrapped in philosophy, preserved in dialogues that were never meant as adventure stories, but as lessons about the human condition. If we are to understand the roots of Atlantis, we must listen closely to what Plato wrote, because inside his scrolls lie not only the seeds of the legend, but also clues to why the story has never died. Plato presents Atlantis in two works, Timaeus and Critias. These are dialogues, conversations between characters, not straightforward history books. In Timaeus, the mention of Atlantis is brief but powerful. It is described as a mighty naval power, lying beyond the pillars of Heracles, richer and larger than anything the Greeks had known. Its kings ruled with skill. Its land was fertile. Its people lived in abundance. In Critias, Plato expands, sketching a city built in concentric circles of land and sea, with canals that connected to the ocean. He describes palaces, temples, and statues of shining metal, elephants roaming fertile plains, and resources that seemed endless. It was, in his words, a place of both wealth and virtue, blessed by Poseidon himself. But then comes the fall. For many generations, the Atlanteans lived with wisdom and moderation. They honored the gods and shared their riches fairly. Yet over time, greed grew. They began to desire more, to stretch their power over distant lands. Their wisdom faltered, their justice weakened, and the gods turned against them. What followed was a cataclysm. Earthquakes shook the ground. Waves rose high, and in a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis sank beneath the sea and was lost. It is easy to see why many believe Plato intended this as a parable. It fits neatly into his philosophy of ideal societies and their collapse. Atlantis is the cautionary tale of hubris, of how abundance without humility leads to ruin. But if it were merely a story, why place it so specifically beyond the pillars of Heracles? Why describe its layout, its resources, its customs in such detail? Why date its destruction to 9,000 years before his own time? Plato was not a careless writer. If his only intention was to warn against arrogance, he could have invented a simpler tale. Instead, he gave Atlantis weight, grounding it in geography, in time, in politics. It feels almost too vivid to be only allegory. Some historians suggest Plato may have been repeating a much older story. According to his dialogues, the account of Atlantis came from Solon, a respected Athenian lawmaker who traveled to Egypt centuries earlier. Egyptian priests, Plato says, told Solon about an island empire that had once fought against Athens before vanishing beneath the waves. Solon intended to write of it, but never did, and the story passed down until Plato himself gave it form. If true, Atlantis is not Plato's invention, but a memory preserved by another civilization. If false, it is still remarkable how carefully he frames his story, as if rooted in tradition, not invention. The 9,000 years he mentions is striking. If taken literally, it places Atlantis around 11,000 years before today, at the very end of the last ice age. At that time, vast ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. As the world warmed, sea levels rose dramatically, drowning coastlines and reshaping continents. Perhaps the Egyptian priests remembered floods, perhaps Solon misinterpreted dates, or perhaps Plato exaggerated for effect. Yet the coincidence is difficult to ignore. The end of the Ice Age was a time of great upheaval, a time when memories of lost lands may indeed have passed into myth. Skeptics point out that no evidence directly ties Plato's Atlantis to any known archaeological site. The Minoans of Crete and Santorini suffered a volcanic disaster, but their timing is too recent. Doggerland in the North Sea sank beneath rising seas, but it lay far from Greece. Submerged ruins in India and Japan provoke curiosity, but they too remain uncertain. Yet supporters argue that absence of evidence is not proof of absence. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and much of it has never been studied. If Atlantis once stood on land now buried under the Atlantic or Mediterranean, it may remain undiscovered simply because we have not looked deeply enough. What is fascinating is how Plato's description resonates with other myths. Many cultures tell of floods, lost lands, or golden ages that ended in disaster. The Sumerian tale of Gilgamesh speaks of a great deluge. The Bible tells of Noah and the flood. Hindu texts describe the drowning of cities and kingdoms. Even Native American traditions carry stories of worlds destroyed by water. Perhaps these are coincidences, or perhaps they are cultural memories of real events. Rising seas, sudden storms, and catastrophes remembered across generations. In this light, Plato's scrolls become one voice in a global chorus, not an isolated myth. If we read Critias carefully, Atlantis is not only a story of loss, it is also a story of potential. Its people mastered engineering, built complex cities, and thrived for generations. They achieved balance before greed led them astray. Perhaps this is why the legend endures. Atlantis is not simply the cautionary tale of arrogance punished, but the dream of a civilization advanced before its time, one that could teach us, if only we could find it again. Plato may have intended only allegory, but his details suggest a possibility that our imaginations cannot ignore. So we return to the question. If Plato's words are echoes of something real, then what exactly are they echoing? Are they distorted memories of the Minoans? Are they recollections of lands lost at the end of the Ice Age? Or are they something else entirely? The faint trace of a civilization so far forgotten that it exists now only as a myth. Whatever the answer, the fact that we are still discussing it more than 2,000 years later shows the power of those scrolls. They planted a seed that has grown across centuries, shaping explorers, philosophers, and scientists alike. The echoes of Plato's scrolls remind us of something deeper than one story. They remind us that history is fragile, that memory can blur into myth, and myth can outlast fact. They remind us that the sea is vast, that the earth holds secrets we have not yet uncovered, and that sometimes the oldest stories are the ones that refuse to die, because perhaps there is truth hidden within them. And so the voice of Plato continues to whisper across time, telling us of a place beyond the pillars, a place of greatness and ruin, a place that may not be entirely gone. Chapter 3. Lost Cities Beneath the Waves. If we leave Plato's scrolls for a moment and turn our eyes to the oceans themselves, we find something remarkable. Atlantis may remain a mystery, but the idea of cities swallowed by water is not just myth, it is a reality. Across the world, beneath lakes, seas, and oceans, there are ruins, roads, temples, and walls that once stood in the light of day. They are silent now, visited only by divers, archaeologists, or sonar scans. But they whisper the same story. Human civilizations have always lived with the sea, and sometimes the sea takes everything back. Consider Petri, off the coast of Greece. It is one of the oldest submerged cities ever found, dating back some 5,000 years. Beneath only a few meters of water, archaeologists discovered streets, courtyards, temples, and even drainage systems. For centuries, it was hidden beneath waves, forgotten, until modern mapping revealed its form. It is not a legend, it is proof that cities can and do vanish beneath the ocean. Further east, in the Bay of Cambay in India, sonar scans in the early 2000s revealed geometric patterns stretching for kilometers across the seafloor. Divers later recovered stone tools, pottery, and structures that suggested a city older than any known in India. Some argue the formations are natural. Others see them as remnants of an ancient settlement drowned when sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. If true, it would mean humans built cities thousands of years before history books say we did. Even if uncertain, the possibility lingers, unsettling and fascinating. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, lies another mystery. In the 1980s, divers discovered a massive stone formation shaped into terraces, steps, and platforms. It looks like a pyramid sunk beneath the sea. Some geologists insist it is natural, sculpted by earthquakes and erosion. Others believe it was carved by human hands, a monument left behind by a civilization we no longer remember. To this day, debate continues. Natural or human-made? The formation has become part of the growing catalog of submerged mysteries that keep the idea of Atlantis alive. And then there is Doggerland, a place not of myth, but of memory. 10,000 years ago, what we now call the North Sea was dry land. Vast plains stretched between Britain and Europe, home to animals and people who hunted, fished, and lived in settlements. As glaciers melted, the sea rose and swallowed it all. Today, fishermen still pull up bones, tools, and artifacts from the seabed. Doggerland shows us that entire landscapes can vanish, leaving only whispers of their existence. These are not the only examples. In Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes, ruins lie submerged, suggesting settlements older than the Inca. In the Caribbean, rumors of roads and structures beneath shallow waters persist. In the Mediterranean, at Bari near Naples, an entire Roman resort town lies underwater, preserved like a ghost of luxury and empire. The list goes on. Wherever we look, water has hidden parts of our story. The existence of these submerged cities does not prove Atlantis, but it changes how we think about it. When Plato wrote of a land swallowed by the sea, it was not an impossibility. It was something that happens. Civilizations rise, the earth shifts, the seas claim their ground. What makes Atlantis extraordinary is not that it was lost, but that it is remembered. Most drowned cities vanish without a trace. Atlantis endures in our imagination because it symbolizes something larger, not just a city, but a golden age. What ties all these sites together is timing. Many of them were drowned near the end of the last ice age, when seas rose dramatically. Whole coastlines that had been inhabited for millennia disappeared in a geological blink. People fled, carrying with them stories of floods and destruction. Over time, those stories became myths, and myths became legends. It is no wonder that so many cultures, from Mesopotamia to India to the Americas, tell of deluges that destroyed entire worlds. Plato's Atlantis fits into this larger pattern, not alone, but part of a global memory of rising water. What is haunting is how little we know of what still lies beneath. More than 70% of our planet is ocean, and we have explored only a fraction. Mountains, valleys, and plains, as large as continents, remain hidden. If Pavlopetri and Balia can be found in shallow waters, what lies deeper, where light never reaches? What ruins might rest on the continental shelves? The vast submerged plains that were once dry land when ice covered the poles. We may have only scratched the surface. It is tempting to imagine that somewhere among these ruins, Atlantis waits, not in the way Plato described, with concentric rings and temples of shining metal, but as a memory embedded in the earth itself. Perhaps Atlantis is not a single city, but a collection of them. The drowned settlements of many peoples blended into one myth. Or perhaps it was real, and it lies hidden still, in a place where no one has yet looked. Lost cities beneath the waves remind us of something humbling. Civilization is fragile. We think of our cities as permanent, our nations as eternal. Yet in the sweep of geological time, they are brief. The sea does not care for walls or temples. It rises, it falls, it shifts with the earth. One day, what we build today may lie beneath the waves as well, waiting for another species to find and wonder at. And perhaps that is why Atlantis endures, because it speaks not just of one lost city, but of the possibility that greatness can vanish in silence, leaving only ruins and memory. Every time a diver descends into the blue and finds a stone wall where no wall should be, every time a sonar scan reveals patterns buried beneath sediment, we are reminded that history is not fixed. It shifts, it hides, it surprises us. Atlantis may be legend, but lost cities are real, and they are waiting in the dark. Chapter 4. The Language of Myths. When we think of Atlantis, it is easy to place it in a category of its own, as though it were a story unlike any other. But when we look closer, we discover it is part of a much wider pattern, woven through cultures and centuries. Atlantis is not the only tale of a world lost to water. Across the planet, from the mountains of Asia to the deserts of Africa, from the islands of the Pacific to the forests of the Americas. Stories of floods and drowned lands echo again and again. They speak different languages, carry different details, but they share a rhythm, a familiar cadence that suggests more than coincidence. To understand Atlantis, we must first understand the language of myths. One of the oldest comes from Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, written on clay tablets thousands of years ago, there is the story of Utnapishtim, a man who survives a great flood sent by the gods. He builds a boat, gathers animals, and waits as the waters rise to cover everything. When the flood recedes, he releases a bird to search for land, and when it does not return, he knows the earth is dry again. The story feels familiar because it is echoed in another text, the Book of Genesis, where Noah builds an ark to survive a flood that destroys nearly all life. Different details, different gods, but the same structure: destruction by water, survival through foresight, and renewal after catastrophe. Travel further east and you will find Hindu texts that tell of Manu, a man warned by a fish of a coming flood. He builds a boat and ties it to the fish, which guides him to safety. In China, legends speak of floods so immense that the entire world seemed covered, with heroes like Yu the Great working tirelessly to drain the waters and restore balance. In Native American traditions, tribes tell of deluges that swept across the land, leaving only a few survivors to begin again. In Polynesia, in Australia, in Africa, flood stories emerge again and again, shaped by local landscapes, but echoing the same themes: water rising, worlds ending, life beginning anew. Why does this pattern exist? One answer is simple: floods happen. They are among the most dramatic and destructive events humans can experience. A river overflowing its banks, a coastline swallowed by a storm, an entire plain drowned when glaciers melt. These are not rare occurrences in human history. They leave scars on landscapes and on memory. When a people experience such a catastrophe, they tell stories. Those stories travel across generations, growing, changing, becoming myth. Over time, the memory of a flood becomes the story of the flood, one so great it covered the whole world. But there may be another layer. During the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically, swallowing vast areas of land. Whole coastlines vanished. Places where people had lived for thousands of years disappeared. Those who fled inland would have carried stories of lands lost to the sea, of villages drowned, of a world that changed before their eyes. Those stories passed down for thousands of years, may be the root of the flood myths we know today. Perhaps Atlantis is simply one of them, a Greek version of a memory that was shared in many forms across the globe. Yet myths are not only about memory, they are also about meaning. When people tell of floods, they are not only describing disaster, they are teaching lessons. The flood comes because of arrogance, because of corruption, because humans forgot their place in the balance of the world. Those who survive do so because they listened, because they prepared, because they remained virtuous. The myth becomes a mirror, showing not only what happened but what could happen again if lessons are ignored. Atlantis fits perfectly into this language. Its people thrived, then grew greedy. They sought too much, stretched too far, and for their hubris, they were punished. It is the same structure found in Noah, in Gilgamesh, and Manu. Disaster follows arrogance, survival follows wisdom. The language of myths is subtle, but it has power. It is filled with symbols that move across cultures. Water is destruction, but also renewal. The flood wipes away, but it also clears the ground for new life. The lost city is a tragedy, but also a mystery that invites us to search. The gods punish, but they also remind us of limits. In this way, myths shape how we think, how we act, how we imagine our place in the world. They remind us that the earth is larger than us, that our civilizations, no matter how strong, are fragile in the face of nature. When we place Atlantis among these stories, it no longer feels like an isolated tale invented by Plato. It feels like part of a chorus, a shared human language that stretches across continents. The details are Greek, but the rhythm is universal, and perhaps this is why Atlantis endures. It is not only the story of one lost island, it is the story of all lost lands, all drowned cities, all the ways humans have confronted the power of water. But there is still something unique about Atlantis. Unlike Noah's Ark or Gilgamesh's flood, it is not only about survival, it is about loss without recovery. The Atlanteans do not rebuild. They do not escape. They vanish. Their city, their culture, their greatness is gone, leaving only mystery behind. That difference matters. It transforms Atlantis from a tale of renewal to a tale of longing. It leaves us with questions instead of answers. What if they survived? What if the city still lies beneath the waves? What if the myth is not only memory but a clue? This is the language of myths. It speaks in symbols and patterns, in destruction and renewal, in arrogance and humility. It speaks of floods that erase and of people who endure. It speaks of civilizations that vanish but live on in story. And in this language, Atlantis finds its place. A story that is not alone, but part of a larger song humanity has been singing since the first waves rose against our shores. Chapter 5. The Ocean's Hidden Maps.
Alden Sea,
If the story of Atlantis tells us anything, it is that the sea is not empty. It holds memories, ruins, and possibilities still unseen. Yet when we speak of exploring our planet, we rarely think of the ocean as the frontier. We look to space, to the stars, to Mars and beyond. But beneath the waves lies a world we barely know. A world more vast, more mysterious, and more hidden than anything beyond our skies. To understand Atlantis or any lost civilization, we must first admit this truth. We have not yet mapped the Earth itself. It may be surprising to hear, but more than 80% of the ocean floor remains unexplored. We have rough outlines, yes. Satellites can detect the shape of the seafloor indirectly by measuring how gravity affects the surface of the water. These measurements give us the ridges of mid-ocean mountains, the trenches that cut like scars into the crust, the outlines of continents long submerged. But these are only sketches, drawn from afar. The detail is crude, the accuracy limited. To truly map the ocean, we need sonar. We need ships crisscrossing the waters, sending pulses of sound down and listening for their echoes. And the truth is, we have done this for only a fraction of the seas. Think of what this means. We know the surface of Mars with greater clarity than we know the floor of our own oceans. We can point to craters on the Moon, valleys on Mars, mountains on Venus. Yet vast regions of the Atlantic remain blank, their secrets untouched. If Atlantis exists anywhere, if its ruins lie waiting, they are hidden not by magic, but by our own neglect. The sea is simply too large, too deep, and too unexplored. The tools we use today are powerful but still limited. Sonar mapping can reveal structures, canyons, ridges, and plains. Submersibles can dive to incredible depths, carrying cameras and sensors into the blackness. Remotely operated vehicles glide through trenches where pressure is crushing, shining their lights into places no human has ever seen. We send instruments to measure temperature, salinity, and currents, to trace how the ocean moves and breathes. Each mission reveals something unexpected: new species, new formations, new landscapes, and each mission reminds us of how much remains unknown. In 2014, an international project known as Seabed 2030 was launched with a bold goal to map the entire ocean floor by the year 2030. It is an ambitious vision, one that requires global cooperation, advanced technology, and years of effort. Already, progress has been made. Vast areas once blank are now filled with detail. But even with this push, the scale of the task is immense. The ocean is vast beyond imagination, and its depths are not easily surrendered. If Atlantis lies hidden, it may take decades of mapping before we stumble upon its trace. Yet hints do appear. Off the coasts of Cuba, Sonar scans once revealed what seemed like geometric structures deep below, sparking excitement that they might be ruins. Later studies were inconclusive, but the possibility lingers. In the Caribbean, divers have reported formations that look like roads or walls. In the Atlantic, symmetrical lines appear in sonar data, later dismissed by scientists as artifacts of mapping, but to others, tantalizing signs of something artificial. Each discovery, whether explained or not, feeds the hope that the sea may yet yield the truth of Atlantis. But perhaps the greatest clue lies not in anomalies, but in patterns. If we overlay maps of ancient coastlines from before the Ice Age with modern sonar scans, we see places where human settlements could once have stood, river deltas now buried, plains now drowned, islands now lost. These are the landscapes where people lived, hunted, and built their homes. And if a civilization advanced enough to inspire the legend of Atlantis existed, it is likely here, on the edges of continents, where the sea has swallowed everything. Mapping the ocean is not just about Atlantis. It is about understanding the planet itself. The seafloor controls earthquakes and volcanoes. It shapes the currents that drive our climate. It hides resources, ecosystems, and histories older than we can imagine. By exploring it, we are not only searching for myths, we are uncovering truths about the Earth's past and our future. Yet Atlantis gives this exploration a story, a reason to look deeper. It turns sonar readings into whispers of possibility, each echo from the deep carrying not only data, but wonder. Imagine one day, as mapping becomes finer, as sonar reveals detail down to meters instead of kilometers, we see it. A structure too precise to be natural. A ring of stone, a wall, a road, resting beneath the sediment. Perhaps the ruins are scattered, broken by time, but recognizable. Perhaps an ROV descends and shines its lights across carvings untouched for millennia. In that moment, the myth would shift into history. Atlantis would no longer be a word of philosophy, but a place, a fact, a rediscovered chapter of humanity's story. Until then, the ocean keeps its silence. But silence does not mean emptiness. It only means mystery, waiting. The maps we draw today are only outlines, shadows of what lies beneath. In the coming years, as technology advances, those shadows will sharpen. We will see with new eyes, and whether Atlantis is there or not, we will find worlds we never knew existed. Atlantis reminds us that the unknown is not only above us in the stars, but beneath us, in the waters that cover most of our planet. To seek it is not to chase fantasy, but to embrace the truth that we have not yet finished exploring our own world. The ocean's hidden maps are not just about lost continents. They are about the possibility that what we think we know is only the surface, and that beneath the waves, the Earth still holds stories untold. Chapter 6. The Day the Seas Rose. At the end of the last ice age, the world was changing in ways our ancestors could hardly comprehend. For tens of thousands of years, humans had lived in a colder, harsher climate, surrounded by glaciers that stretched across continents, locked water away in mountains of ice, and kept sea levels far lower than today. The Earth was a different place. Coastlines extended farther, continents were connected by wide plains, and rivers carved paths across landscapes we can no longer see. But then, as the planet warmed, the ice began to melt, and the seas began to rise. Slowly at first, then in pulses of astonishing speed, the oceans reclaimed the land. What followed was one of the most dramatic transformations in human history, a global event that may have inspired the flood myths we still tell, and perhaps even the story of Atlantis. Picture a family living on the edge of Doggerland, the vast plain that once connected Britain to Europe 10,000 years ago. This was a fertile landscape of rivers, marshes, and forests. Hunters followed herds across open fields. Fishers cast nets into winding streams. Families built shelters on land that seemed solid and safe. But as the ice melted in the north, the North Sea crept closer. Each generation saw the shoreline inching inland, villages abandoned, fields swallowed by marsh. For centuries, the change was gradual, but then came sudden surges. At times, sea levels rose by several meters in only a few centuries, fast enough that stories of lost land and drowned homes would have passed from one mouth to another. Eventually, Doggerland was gone, its people forced to higher ground, their world left beneath the waves. The same story played out across the globe. In the Persian Gulf, what is now a shallow sea was once a lush valley, fed by rivers that would later become the Tigris and Euphrates. Archaeologists believe early humans may have settled there, building communities that thrived until the waters rose and drowned the land. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf once connected islands that today are scattered across the sea. Where there are now waves and coral reefs, there were once forests and fields. In the Americas, coastal plains vanished, pushing people inland. The earth itself was shifting, and everywhere humans had to adapt. It is not hard to see how these changes could have become stories of floods. Imagine watching your homeland sink beneath the sea within a lifetime. Imagine returning to where your grandparents once lived and finding only water stretching to the horizon. Such memories would not fade quickly. They would become warnings, lessons, myths, and in the Mediterranean world where Plato lived, these stories may have echoed in the tale of Atlantis, a mighty land destroyed, when the seas rose and the earth shook. Science tells us this was not a single uniform event, but a series of pulses. One of the most dramatic was the so-called meltwater pulse 1A. Around 14,000 years ago, when sea levels may have risen by as much as 20 meters in just a few centuries. For people living at the time, it would have felt like the earth itself was drowning. Coastlines retreated at astonishing speed. Islands disappeared. Whole ecosystems were transformed. Those who lived through it carried the memory into legend. Even after the major pulses ended, the seas kept rising. By about 6,000 years ago, they had reached near modern levels, but not before swallowing vast stretches of land. Archaeologists estimate that more than 20 million square kilometers of habitable land was lost. That is an area larger than modern South America, erased from the surface and hidden beneath the ocean. Think of what cultures, what settlements, what beginnings of civilization may have been buried there, their traces left for divers and sonar to stumble upon millennia later. It is within this context that the legend of Atlantis gains weight. Plato's timeline, 9,000 years before his time, would place Atlantis at the very end of this great transformation, when the last remnants of Ice Age coastlines were giving way to the rising seas. If Atlantis was real, it may not have been punished by gods, but by the climate itself, by a planet shifting from one age to another. The story of sudden destruction, of earthquakes and floods, may have been the cultural memory of real disasters caused by ice sheets collapsing, glaciers melting, or tsunamis triggered by volcanic eruptions. Consider the eruption of Thera on the island we now call Santorini, around 1600 BCE. It devastated the Minoan civilization, one of the most advanced of its time. Ash-covered cities, waves swept across Crete, and the event was remembered for centuries. If a single eruption could scar memory so deeply, imagine what the end of the Ice Age must have done. Entire generations living through losses that reshaped the world itself. The seas did not only take land, they reshaped the imagination. Water became both feared and revered, a force of destruction but also of renewal. Myths of floods became metaphors for arrogance, for punishment, for rebirth. And so, when Plato spoke of Atlantis, he was not inventing something entirely new. He was speaking in a language humanity already knew, a language shaped by the memory of rising seas. Atlantis, then, could be both allegory and history, both story and memory, both warning and echo of something that really happened. And we are not finished with rising seas. Today, as ice sheets melt once more, Coastlines are retreating again. Entire nations face the possibility of being swallowed by the ocean. Tuvalu, the Maldives, Kiribati, names we know now, places whose people already feel the waves at their doors. If these lands vanish, what stories will their descendants tell? Will they become the Atlantis of the future? Remembered as islands lost to the sea, their ruins buried beneath the waves, their names living on as symbols of fragility. History may repeat itself, not in myth, but in reality. When we look back at the day the seas rose, we see more than geology. We see human lives transformed, cultures uprooted, memories forged in the face of loss. We see the seeds of myth planted, carried forward for thousands of years, until they reached Plato's pen. And we see a reminder that the earth is always changing, that the boundaries we think of as permanent, shorelines, coasts, continents, are only temporary lines in an ocean that moves with time. Atlantis may or may not have existed as Plato described, but the world it represents did exist. A world of lands drowned, of cities lost, of people watching the water rise higher and higher until their homes were gone. That is the truth behind the myth. The seas did rise. They always do, and the stories we tell about them are not only warnings from the past, but reminders for the future. Chapter 7. Atlantis and Plate Tectonics. When Plato described Atlantis sinking beneath the sea, he imagined a sudden disaster, earthquakes shaking the land, waves rising up, and an island vanishing in a single night. To him, and to the people of his time, such an image must have seemed almost supernatural, the anger of gods punishing a nation. But today we have another language for these forces. We call it geology. We call it plate tectonics. It is the story of how the earth itself moves, how continents drift, how oceans open and close, how mountains rise and fall. To understand the possibility of Atlantis, we have to understand that the ground beneath our feet is never still. The surface of the earth is not one solid shell. It is broken into plates, massive slabs of rock that float on the hotter, softer mantle beneath. They shift, collide, and slide past each other, moving only centimeters each year, but with power enough to reshape the planet. Over millions of years, they build mountain ranges like the Himalayas, tear continents apart, as in the Rift Valley of Africa, and open vast oceans like the Atlantic itself. To us, standing still on the ground, it feels permanent, but on the scale of geology, everything is temporary. The continents are travelers, the ocean floors are born and destroyed, and the map of the earth is always being redrawn. When these plates move suddenly, we feel it as earthquakes. When they collide, volcanoes erupt. When stress builds and releases, the land can rise or fall in an instant. Whole coastlines can shift. Islands can vanish beneath the waves or emerge where there was once only sea. These are not myths. They are part of the living planet. And if we imagine Atlantis, perhaps we should not imagine it punished by gods, but reshaped by the same tectonic forces that still move the earth today. Look to the Mediterranean and the Aegean, where earthquakes have shattered cities for millennia. The eruption of Thera, the collapse of Crete, the tremors that toppled temples in Greece and Turkey, all are reminders of the fragility of human settlement in tectonic zones. Imagine a city, larger than any of its time, built on a volcanic island or a tectonic boundary. Its people might thrive for centuries, until one day the earth beneath them shifts. In minutes, the ground cracks, the sea rushes in, and everything is gone. To survivors or to those who heard the tale later, it would indeed have seemed like divine punishment. But the forces of tectonics are not only local. The Atlantic Ocean itself was born from a rift, when ancient continents pulled apart. If Atlantis was said to lie beyond the Pillars of Heracles in the Atlantic, then its very home was a place shaped by tectonic power. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a chain of underwater mountains, still rises in the center of the ocean, creating new crust as magma wells up. It is not hard to imagine islands forming and sinking there over time, volcanic peaks rising above the waves only to collapse again. Perhaps Atlantis was one of these, a volcanic island large enough to host a civilization, destroyed when the ridge shifted beneath it. There are precedents. The island of Krakatoa in Indonesia exploded in 1883 with such force that most of it disappeared into the sea. Entire coastlines were destroyed, and the sound of the eruption traveled around the world. In 1963, Surtsey emerged from the sea off Iceland. Created by volcanic eruption, islands are born and erased this way all the time, on scales human memory struggles to grasp. If such events happened thousands of years ago, in an age before records, would they not live on as myths of lands swallowed whole? Some suggest that Atlantis was connected to subduction zones, where one plate slips beneath another, dragging islands down. In places like the Caribbean or the Pacific Ring of Fire, land is constantly reshaped. Earthquakes lift entire regions or send them collapsing into the sea. Whole islands sink slowly, leaving coral reefs to mark their outlines. If an ancient civilization built upon such land, its destruction would not only be possible, but almost inevitable. Even today we see hints of this process. The city of Port Royal in Jamaica, once called the wickedest city in the world, was partly destroyed in 1692 when an earthquake caused the sand beneath it to liquefy. In minutes, buildings, streets, and people sank into the sea. Divers still explore its ruins underwater, a frozen moment of catastrophe. Port Royal was no myth, but to future generations, without records, it might have seemed like one. Atlantis could have been the Port Royal of the ancient world, a city swallowed suddenly, remembered only in whispers. The idea of tectonics also helps explain why we have not found Atlantis. If it lay on a fault line or a volcanic ridge, its ruins may not be preserved neatly beneath shallow seas. They may have been destroyed entirely, broken, buried under layers of sediment, or sunk into trenches miles deep. The ocean floor is not a museum. It is an active landscape, constantly reshaping itself. If Atlantis existed, much of it may be gone, not because it never was, but because the earth itself consumed it. Yet this destruction also offers a strange kind of possibility, because tectonics does not only erase, it also reveals. Earthquakes lift ancient seabeds to the surface. Volcanic eruptions expose layers of history buried for millennia. As the plates move, they may bring fragments of Atlantis back within reach, raising clues from the depths. What lies hidden today may one day rise again. When we think of Atlantis through the lens of plate tectonics, it becomes less a fairy tale and more a geological possibility. Civilizations have always lived at the mercy of the earth. We build on coastlines, on fertile volcanic soils, on river deltas rich with life, because those are the places that sustain us. But those are also the places most vulnerable to earthquakes, eruptions, and floods. The very forces that give us life also threaten to take it away. Atlantis is the ultimate expression of that truth. A city built on the gifts of the earth, destroyed by the same. And this is perhaps why the myth resonates so strongly. Because deep down, we know it could happen. It has happened. Again and again. Pompeii buried by Vesuvius. Santorini devastated by eruption. Port Royal swallowed by the sea. Entire coastlines drowned as glaciers melted. Atlantis may be a story, but it is a story grounded in the reality of a restless planet. Plate tectonics is not an invention of modern science. It is the explanation for what ancient peoples already knew: the earth moves, and when it does, it changes everything. So when we imagine Atlantis sinking in a single night, we do not have to imagine gods hurling thunderbolts or divine punishment from above. We need only imagine the ground shifting beneath their feet, the sea rushing in, the world collapsing in minutes. It has happened before. It will happen again. And somewhere in those events, somewhere in the dance of the Earth's plates, the legend of Atlantis may have been born. Chapter 8. Biology of a Sunken World. When we imagine Atlantis sinking, we tend to think only of stone and marble, of cities collapsing, of people fleeing into waves that devoured them. But if we pause and look at the sea itself, another picture emerges. Because the ocean is not only a grave, it is alive. It is filled with ecosystems that thrive where no sunlight reaches, where pressure would crush us, where conditions seem impossible yet life still flourishes. If a civilization ever sank into this world, it would not have entered silence. It would have entered an environment already teeming with strange forms of survival. To think about Atlantis as a sunken world is to think about biology, about how life could continue, adapt, and even flourish in places we once thought uninhabitable. The first thing to remember is that sunlight only penetrates the upper layers of the ocean. Beneath a few hundred meters, darkness takes over, and yet, in those depths, life abounds. Some creatures glow with bioluminescence, producing their own light to hunt, to communicate, or to attract prey. Others move slowly, conserving energy in the cold. Entire ecosystems thrive not on sunlight, but on chemical energy. Around hydrothermal vents, fissures in the seafloor, where superheated water bursts forth rich in minerals, life has created entire communities. Tube worms longer than a human, crabs with hairy claws, fish with translucent bodies, all feeding not on plants, but on bacteria that turn chemicals into energy. It is a world completely separate from the sun, a reminder that life does not depend on the same rules everywhere. If humans were forced into this environment, could they adapt? Perhaps not our bodies as they are now, but our ingenuity might find ways. Imagine an Atlantean people who, faced with their island's destruction, retreated into caverns connected to the sea. At first, survival might mean sealing themselves away, finding air pockets, using fire and stored food. But over generations, adaptation would require more. They would need to grow food in darkness. They might cultivate fungi, which do not need sunlight, or algae in chambers lit by bioluminescent creatures. They might learn to harness geothermal heat for energy, or to use bacteria that thrive on minerals to produce sustenance. What sounds like science fiction is already science fact in the microbial world. Entire organisms live off what the earth provides at vents and seeps, never knowing the sun. An Atlantean civilization could, in theory, learn to partner with this biology, creating a sunless agriculture beneath the sea. Even without total submersion, adaptation could mean merging with coastal ecosystems. Coral reefs, for example, are vast living structures that provide shelter and food for countless species. They are fragile, but they are also powerful in their complexity. A society that learned to live among them might use coral itself as building material, growing walls and homes rather than carving them. In our time, scientists experiment with coral restoration, placing small fragments that grow into larger reefs. Imagine Atlanteans doing the same, cultivating coral as architecture, blending their city with the biology of the sea until the line between human and ocean blurred. The ocean also teaches resilience. Fish migrate through immense distances. Whales dive to crushing depths. Sharks navigate by sensing magnetic fields. Each adaptation shows a path to survival in a world where humans might otherwise falter. A sunken Atlantis could have learned to observe and mimic these strategies, creating tools that echo the abilities of sea life. Perhaps their navigation was guided not by stars, but by currents and magnetic lines. Perhaps their architecture resembled the efficiency of schools of fish or the symmetry of shells. Biology is not only a source of food, it is a source of inspiration. There is also the question of pressure. At depths of thousands of meters, the weight of water above is immense, enough to crush submarines if they are not built carefully. But life there does not collapse. It adapts. Fish develop bodies without air-filled cavities, so there is nothing to compress. Bacteria adjust their chemistry to function in extreme conditions. If humans ever attempted to live in such depths, they would need to design their world the same way, abandoning structures filled with air for ones shaped like the creatures that already live there. Domes, shells, flexible materials instead of rigid stone. Once again, biology would be the guide. Perhaps this is where the legend of Atlantis and the reality of biology meet. Plato described a city built in rings, with channels of water woven through it. What if those rings were not only symbolic, but practical? Concentric design is common in nature, in shells, in corals, in the growth of fungi. It distributes pressure evenly. It grows outward with balance. If an underwater civilization existed, it might look very much like this, not because of myth, but because of biology. The Earth already provides the blueprint. The idea of biology sustaining a sunken Atlantis is not only fantasy, it is something we ourselves are beginning to explore. In recent decades, scientists have turned to the deep ocean as a model for biotechnology. Enzymes from vent bacteria are used in medicine. Algae are studied as sources of renewable energy. Coral is examined for bone grafts. Even bioluminescence has been harnessed for imaging cells. The ocean is not only a mystery, but a resource, showing us how life can thrive in conditions we thought impossible. If we are beginning to learn this now, what might an older, lost civilization have discovered if it were forced to survive beneath the sea? There is also another angle. What if Atlantis is not about humans adapting, but about biology itself creating the story? Imagine ruins that are not ruins at all, but reefs that grew into shapes resembling walls and pillars. Imagine terraces formed by volcanic rock, later colonized by coral, their symmetry mistaken for design. The biology of the sea often creates forms that look human-made, confusing divers and fueling myths. In this sense, Atlantis may be less a city lost, and more a natural structure dressed in the clothing of myth, made alive by the imagination of those who saw it. Yet the possibility of life adapting to a sunken world lingers. We are drawn to it because it challenges the limits of what we think is possible. Could humans live without sunlight? Could a civilization survive on chemistry rather than plants? Could biology teach us to build cities where pressure, darkness, and cold rule? The ocean says yes because it already has. Life is there. It has been there for millions of years. It thrives where we would die. And if life can, perhaps humans can too. To think of Atlantis through biology is to see it not only as a story of loss, but as a story of transformation, a people who did not vanish, but who changed, merging with the ocean's ecosystems, learning from its creatures, building in harmony with its biology. Maybe that is why the legend endures. Because deep down we know that life is resilient, that biology always finds a way, and that even in the darkest depths, a city could still breathe. Chapter 9. The technology of the deep. When we picture Atlantis, we often imagine it as a mirror of ourselves. Cities of marble, gleaming temples, roads and canals, carved by stone tools, perhaps machines of bronze and iron. But if Atlantis existed, and if it endured beneath the waves or within the earth, then its technology would not have looked like ours. It would have been shaped by the sea itself, by pressure and darkness, by currents and minerals, by a biology and geology far removed from the surface world. If we are to imagine Atlantis not as a memory but as a living civilization, we must imagine its tools, its energy, its science. And to do that, we need to look at what the deep ocean already provides. Energy is the first challenge. Without sunlight, the familiar path of fire, wood, and crops would not have been enough. But beneath the ocean, energy is everywhere, hidden in forms most surface dwellers never see. Geothermal heat rises from vents and fissures, carrying with it minerals and power. The same forces that drive volcanic eruptions on land fuel underwater volcanoes, ridges, and vents. They could provide limitless energy to anyone who learned to harness them. Today, we dream of tapping geothermal energy as a renewable resource. but perhaps Atlantis had already done it. Imagine chambers built near vents, walls of stone, designed not to collapse but to channel heat. Imagine turbines spun not by wind, but by boiling water forced upward from the Earth's mantle. To us, this would look advanced, almost futuristic. To them, it may have been survival. Light is another obstacle. In the deep, there is only darkness, yet the sea glows with its own sparks of life. Bioluminescence is everywhere, from jellyfish to fish to bacteria that cover the seafloor, to surface eyes. This glow is eerie, but to those who live with it, it could be a resource. A civilization in the depths might cultivate glowing organisms, breeding them into lamps, weaving them into architecture, creating light without fire. Instead of torches, walls themselves might shimmer softly, lined with colonies of algae or fungi that glow in the dark. Imagine a city that shines not from electricity but from biology, a place where illumination is alive, growing, and replenishing itself. Materials too would be different. On land, we build with wood, clay, stone, and metal. Beneath the sea, the palette changes. Coral grows strong and can be shaped into walls. Shells form structures harder than stone. Minerals from vents create chimneys of iron and copper. Even volcanic glass, obsidian, forms in abundance under pressure. A people living there might never smelt ore and fire, but they might learn to harvest what the ocean gives directly. They could weave kelp into ropes, use shells as tiles, corals as columns. Structures might grow instead of being built, cultivated like gardens, rather than carved like quarries. Our skyscrapers rise through labor, but theirs could rise through biology, grown into place by patient design. Communication in such a world might also differ. We rely on air to carry our words, on wires to carry our signals. But beneath the sea, sound travels farther and faster than in air. Whales sing across entire oceans. Dolphins communicate with clicks and whistles that carry through vast distances. An Atlantean civilization might have built its communication on the same principle. Perhaps their messages resonated through stone and water, carried by vibrations, audible not to the ear, but felt in the bones. Perhaps they had instruments that amplified these vibrations, allowing entire cities to stay connected through the pulse of sound. To us, it might seem mystical. To them, it would have been as natural as radio is to us. Transportation, too, would be transformed. On land, we built carts, roads, and sails. Underwater, movement is shaped by currents, by buoyancy, by the constant pressure of the sea. The people adapted to this world might design vessels that mimic fish, streamlined and flexible. They might have used chambers that filled with air or water to rise and sink, much like submarines do today. Or they might have gone further, building entire cities that floated, tethered to the seafloor, but moving gently with the currents. We imagine Atlantis as static stone, but perhaps it was fluid, shifting, drifting with the ocean, never rooted in one place but always alive. And then there is knowledge. The greatest technology of all is not a tool, but a way of thinking. If Atlantis survived, it must have learned to observe and imitate the sea itself, to understand currents as pathways, tides as clocks, pressure as energy, biology as architecture. We talk of biomimicry today, designing materials and machines inspired by nature. But in the deep, this would not be a philosophy. It would be necessity. To survive, they would have had to become part of the ocean, blending their tools with its patterns. Technology would not look like wires and engines. It would look like shells, corals, glowing organisms, and the slow but powerful rhythm of currents. Even myths of Atlantis hint at technology beyond its time. Plato described canals that carried water through the island, great temples covered in metals, and ships more powerful than those of Athens. To his audience, these descriptions sounded extraordinary. To us, they sound like echoes of engineering, far ahead of its era. If Atlantis was real, and if it continued beneath the waves, that engineering might not have stopped. It might have shifted, evolved into forms we cannot imagine, hidden from our sight, but perfectly suited to the deep. Of course, we cannot know, but imagining the technology of the deep forces us to see differently. It asks us to step away from the idea that all civilizations must follow the same path of fire, bronze, iron, electricity. It asks us to consider that survival in other environments would create entirely different solutions. Solutions that might seem alien to us, but logical to those who live there. Atlantis then becomes not just a story of loss, but a story of possibility. A reminder that technology is not fixed, but fluid, shaped always by the world around it. And perhaps this is why the legend endures. Because when we think of Atlantis, we are not only thinking of the past, we are thinking of futures we have not yet built, of ways of living we have not yet tried. A city that glows with living light, that harnesses the heat of the earth, that communicates in vibrations and builds with coral. It sounds impossible, yet it is only an extension of what the ocean already offers. The technology of the deep is here, waiting. The question is whether we will ever find it, or whether it will remain forever hidden, a whisper beneath the waves. Chapter 10. The underground continent. When people imagine Atlantis, they usually picture it swallowed by the sea, its palaces drowned, and its temples hidden under waves. But what if the story of sinking was never about vanishing into the ocean at all? What if the island did not disappear, but instead collapsed downward, falling not into the sea, but into the earth itself? This is another possibility, one that carries its own strange power. Atlantis not as a lost island, but as an underground continent, hidden beneath rock cavern and crust, alive in ways we cannot see. The earth is not solid all the way through. Beneath the thin skin of continents and ocean floors lies a world of layers, of hollows and voids, of chambers carved by water and fire. Caves stretch for miles under mountains. Lava tubes run for kilometers beneath volcanic fields. Vast underground rivers carve out spaces large enough to hold entire cities. To us, they are places of exploration or danger, visited by cavers or mapped by scientists. But to a people forced underground, they could become something else entirely. A new home, a refuge, when the surface failed. Imagine Atlantis at the moment of collapse. The island trembles, the earth splits, buildings fall into fissures as the ground swallows itself. To those on the surface, it would look like destruction, the island gone forever. But beneath, the collapse could open vast hollows, chambers large enough to hold survivors. What looked like the end from above may have been the beginning of an underground existence. Over time, those who remained might carve out their world deeper still, following rivers, shaping caverns, learning to live within the bones of the earth. Life underground is different. There is no sun, no sky, no weather, but there is water, dripping and flowing, feeding subterranean lakes. There is heat, rising from the mantle, warming rock and chambers. There are minerals, rich and varied, far more abundant than on the surface. And there are creatures, pale fish with no eyes, insects that glow faintly, fungi that spread across stone like living carpets. In this world, survival would mean learning to use what is already there. Fungi could be cultivated as food, minerals could be tools, heat could be energy. Slowly, generation by generation, an underground society could flourish, sealed off from the surface. It is easy to think of caves as small, claustrophobic spaces, but the reality is far grander. Some caverns are so large that skyscrapers could fit inside them. In Vietnam, Sun Dong Cave stretches high enough to contain its own forests, with clouds forming under its ceiling. In Mexico, the Cave of Crystals holds chambers filled with translucent selenite pillars taller than houses. The earth holds spaces vast enough to feel like another world, hidden only by the crust above. For a civilization, these spaces could become entire landscapes, continents, beneath continents. And perhaps the people of Atlantis, if they survived this way, would not have thought of themselves as buried or trapped. They might have seen themselves as chosen, hidden, preserved from the chaos above. The world outside was changing, seas rising, earthquakes reshaping coastlines, disasters wiping out surface settlements. Underground, they were protected. They were safe from storms, from invasion, from the endless shifting of the ocean. The earth itself became their shield, and the myth of punishment might in fact have been a story of survival. What kind of culture grows in such a place? Without stars, their sense of time would change. Without sky, their art and stories would turn inward, inspired not by constellations, but by stone formations, crystals, and the flickering light of fungi. Their architecture might grow organically, carved directly from cave walls, shaped by water and erosion as much as by design. Their technology would not depend on agriculture or sunlight, but on geothermal energy, minerals, and the symbiosis of underground biology. What they lost in connection to the surface, they may have gained in resilience and secrecy. The underground continent also carries a symbolic weight. In myths across the world, hidden realms lie beneath the earth. The Greeks spoke of Hades, the Norse told of Svartalfheim, home of dwarves and craftsmen. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, there are subterranean worlds like Patala, filled with beings unseen by humans. Even in modern folklore, stories of Agartha and Shambhala describe advanced civilizations hidden underground. Perhaps these myths are not separate from Atlantis, but reflections of the same idea, a people who survived by retreating beneath the surface, remembered in whispers as a lost kingdom. Geology even gives this idea some grounding. Throughout history, earthquakes have opened fissures, volcanoes have created tubes, and collapses have formed sinkholes large enough to swallow entire towns. If such an event occurred in ancient times, it would not have been understood as geology. It would have been told as divine punishment, as a land swallowed whole. But if people survived within those spaces, they would not have disappeared. They would have adapted. And in adapting, they would have built a new kind of civilization, one hidden not beneath waves, but beneath stone. To us, the underground seems alien. We crave light and air. We think of caves as temporary shelters, not permanent homes. But life adapts to whatever it must. If the surface world was no longer safe, people would find a way below, and in time, they would not only survive, but thrive. They would become a people of darkness and stone, no less human, but shaped by their environment in ways we cannot imagine. Their world would be invisible to us, yet fully real. Atlantis would not be lost. It would simply be hidden in the earth itself, and perhaps, in some way, it still is. We explore caves, drill into crust, and map the mantle, but we have barely scratched the surface of what lies beneath. Most of the subterranean world remains untouched, unseen, unknown. If an underground continent exists, if a civilization adapted to such depths, we would not yet know it. They could live there still, silent, unseen. A reminder that the earth holds not only oceans of mystery above its crust, but entire continents of mystery below. Atlantis as an underground continent is not just a myth. It is an idea that speaks to resilience, to survival, to the possibility that destruction is never total. It tells us that when one world ends, another may begin, hidden from sight, but alive in its own way. The island may have sunk, but perhaps it did not vanish. Perhaps it descended, and in that descent a new world was born. Chapter 11. The ocean as a shield. When we think of the ocean, we usually think of it as a threat. It is the force that swallows, that drowns, that hides cities like Atlantis beneath its endless weight. To Plato, the ocean was the agent of divine punishment, the final sentence on a civilization that had grown too proud. But what if we have misunderstood the story? What if the ocean was not punishment at all, but protection? What if instead of ending Atlantis, the waters preserved it, shielding it from time, from invasion, from the endless rise and fall of surface empires? The ocean may not only have been the destroyer, it may have been the guardian. The sea is the ultimate barrier. To cross it is difficult, even with our ships and technologies. In ancient times, it was nearly impossible. Empires rose and fell on land, clashing, conquering, consuming one another. But the ocean remained separate, holding its secrets. If Atlantis lay beneath its surface, then no army could reach it. No conqueror could claim it. No invader could plunder it. What appeared to the surface world as disappearance may, to Atlantis, have been liberation. Hidden beneath the waves, they could continue in silence, untouched by the chaos above. The ocean also preserves. Think of shipwrecks lying on the seafloor. Their wood still intact after centuries, their artifacts undisturbed. Think of bodies found in cold, deep lakes, preserved so well that even hair and skin remain after thousands of years. In the right conditions, the sea is not decay but stasis, a pause button on history. If Atlantis sank whole, then beneath the sediments, beneath the slow accumulation of silt, its temples and houses might still stand, waiting. The ocean covers, but it also protects. What is buried beneath its blanket may remain more intact than anything left on land. There is also the matter of time. Civilizations on the surface are exposed to everything. Climate shifts, wars, invasions, plagues, storms. Over centuries, nothing survives untouched. Wood rots, stone erodes, monuments collapse. But under the sea, change is slower. Hidden beneath pressure and darkness, ruins can last far longer. We see this in submerged cities like Pavlopetri or Baiae, preserved for millennia until divers rediscovered them. The ocean shielded them, not by design, but simply by being itself. Atlantis, if real, might not be gone at all. It might be waiting, whole or in part, behind its shield of water. But what if it is not just the ruins that survived? What if the people did as well? To imagine this, we must think differently. For us, the ocean is alien, hostile, unlivable. But to a people who sank with their island, who had no choice but to adapt, the ocean may have become home. They might have seen the surface as fragile, a place of endless wars and collapses, while their own hidden world beneath the sea became safe, stable, unchanging. The ocean's shield is not only physical but cultural. It isolates. It prevents influence, invasion, and interference. Atlantis could have grown in silence, protected from the rest of humanity, evolving into something we can barely imagine. In this vision, the story of Atlantis is not about punishment, but about retreat. The ocean was not the weapon of angry gods, but the veil that hid a civilization from view. Myths of destruction may be only half the truth. Beneath them lies the possibility that Atlantis still exists because it was hidden. To those who remained on the surface, it was gone. To those who sank with it, it was preserved. There is another way the ocean shields by making discovery difficult. Even now, with satellites and sonar, we struggle to map the seafloor. We send machines to Mars more easily than we send them to the deep. If Atlantis lies anywhere below, the ocean ensures it stays secret. Its shield is not just water, but depth, darkness, and pressure. Every attempt to look is slowed, limited, delayed, until we learn to see fully beneath the waves. Atlantis remains untouchable, not because it is not there, but because the ocean keeps it hidden. The symbolism is striking. On the surface, civilizations build walls, fortresses, armies, always seeking protection from enemies. But Atlantis, if it exists, may have found the greatest shield of all in the sea itself. A barrier that no weapon can breach, no empire can conquer. A protection that has lasted not decades or centuries, but millennia. If the Atlanteans survive, they may look at us as vulnerable, unprotected, exposed to every storm of history, while they remain safe under the steady guard of the ocean. And perhaps we too sense this. The myth of Atlantis carries not only fear of loss, but awe at endurance. We wonder if somewhere, beneath miles of water, the city still thrives, untouched. We are drawn to the possibility because it reflects something we long for: permanence, security, the idea that there is a place immune to the endless cycle of collapse. The ocean, in its vastness, provides that illusion. It feels eternal, unchanging. even as it shifts slowly beneath time. Atlantis, protected within it, becomes a dream of survival beyond history. Of course, the shield cuts both ways. The ocean protects, but it also isolates. A civilization beneath it would be safe, but also alone, cut off from the flow of humanity, from the exchange of ideas and cultures. Over time, they would become utterly different, perhaps unrecognizable to us. They might have technologies we cannot comprehend, shaped by pressure and darkness. They might live longer, think differently, adapt to rhythms foreign to the surface world. To us, they would seem alien. To them, we might seem primitive, exposed, reckless. The shield that preserves also divides. Yet perhaps this is what myths are hinting at. Atlantis is not gone, but hidden. It does not need to be under our feet for the story to matter. It exists as an idea, a reminder that the sea is both destroyer and guardian, that what seems lost may only be protected beyond our reach. The ocean is the great veil, the shield that hides not only ruins, but possibilities. Atlantis, behind it, remains untouchable, whether as stone or as memory, whether as ruins or as life, and so the myth continues. Not of a city destroyed, but of a city preserved. Not of a civilization punished, but of one hidden. The ocean does not only drown, it shields, and somewhere beneath its depths, perhaps Atlantis still waits, not as a ruin but as a world, alive and guarded by the waters that took it from our sight. Chapter 12. Atlantis and Us. The story of Atlantis is not only about a lost world, it is also about us. Whenever we talk about Atlantis, we are really asking questions about humanity itself, who we were, what we are capable of, what we might become, and what we might lose. That is why the myth has never faded. It is not just curiosity about a city under the sea. It is the recognition that Atlantis could have been us, or still could be, and that its lessons reach far beyond whether the island was real or imagined. For Plato, Atlantis was a mirror held up to Athens. He told the story to teach that even the greatest societies fall if they allow arrogance and greed to overcome wisdom and balance. In this sense, Atlantis has always been about us, about how we live and the choices we make. But the legend has evolved since Plato's time. It has become a canvas onto which every generation paints its fears and its hopes. In the 19th century, people imagined Atlantis as the source of all civilizations, the mother culture that spread knowledge to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. In the 20th, it became a symbol of lost technology, a place of crystal energy and machines beyond our understanding. Today, it is sometimes linked with climate change, a reminder that seas are rising again and that our own cities may one day become the Atlantics of the future. When we think of Atlantis, we are also thinking of survival. Did they die with their island, or did some escape? If they escaped, did they settle among us, bringing fragments of their knowledge into the cultures we now know? This question haunts the myth because it suggests that Atlantis might not only belong to the past, it might be woven into our present. If survivors scattered, their knowledge could live on in the ruins of Egypt, in the myths of Mesopotamia, in the architecture of South America. It would mean that we carry pieces of Atlantis with us, fragments hidden in plain sight. And then there is the question of difference. If Atlantis endured beneath the sea or underground, what would its people be like now? Would they still be human as we know ourselves? Or would their environment have changed them into something else? If they live without sunlight, perhaps their eyes have grown large and sensitive, or perhaps they have lost the need for sight altogether, relying on sound and vibration as whales and dolphins do. If they live under immense pressure, their bodies may have adapted, stronger in ways we cannot imagine. If they built their technology with biology and geothermal energy, their cities may seem alive to us, glowing with organisms, pulsing with heat. To us they would seem alien. To themselves, they would be simply human, continuing the line of survival that began long before history. The myth also forces us to ask how we would react if Atlantis were found. If explorers one day revealed ruins beneath the Atlantic, with carvings, walls, or machines, unlike anything we know, what would we do? Would we rush to claim it, to own its artifacts, to strip it for resources and secrets? Or would we recognize it as something sacred, something to be preserved, a reminder of our fragility? The way we answer that question says more about us than about Atlantis. It shows whether we have learned from the myth or whether we are doomed to repeat it. Atlantis has also become a metaphor for collapse. Civilizations rise, flourish, and then fall. History shows us this pattern again and again. The Maya, the Romans, the Khmer Empire. None were destroyed by gods, but all were undone by a mixture of environment, politics, and human error. Atlantis, as Plato told it, was destroyed by hubris. That pattern feels familiar. We too build cities, wield power, consume resources. We too risk believing that our achievements make us invincible. Atlantis is a reminder that no society is immune, not even ours. But the story is not only warning, it is also hope. Because if Atlantis endured, if its people survived in any form, then collapse is not always the end. It can be transformation. A society that vanishes from one place may continue in another, in altered forms, carrying knowledge forward in unexpected ways. If Atlantis still exists, hidden beneath the sea or within the earth, then the story of humanity is not only one of loss, but also of resilience. We adapt. We find ways. We survive even when the world changes. And perhaps that is why Atlantis feels so close to us, why it has never faded from imagination. It is not only a place we wonder about, but a reflection of ourselves. When we ask if Atlantis existed, we are really asking, could we lose everything? Could we survive? Could our own world one day be remembered as Atlantis is remembered now, a great civilization drowned by water, recalled only in myth? The answer, of course, is yes. Seas are rising again. Islands are sinking. Cities are threatened by floods. But the never sinking, cities are threatened by floods. What happened in myth could happen in reality, and not in some distant future, but within centuries. In that sense, Atlantis is not a story of the past at all. It is a story of the present, and of what may come. It asks us whether we will become another lost civilization, or whether we will find a way to endure, to adapt, to survive as Atlantis may have. In every way, Atlantis is us. It is the fear of collapse, the hope of survival, the dream of hidden knowledge, the mirror of our pride, and the reminder of our fragility. Whether it is real or not matters less than the way it continues to shape how we think about ourselves. Atlantis is not gone. It lives wherever humans wonder about their place in the world, about the line between arrogance and wisdom, between destruction and endurance. Atlantis is the story we tell about what it means to be human and what it means to risk losing everything we build. Chapter 13, Signals. From the deep. The ocean is vast and silent, or so it seems. But in truth, it is never quiet. Beneath the waves, the water carries voices that travel farther than any sound on land. Whales sing to each other across entire basins. Currents hum with motion. Earthquakes echo as low rumbles through the crust. Even the faint shifting of ice and the distant cracking of rocks create vibrations that ripple through the sea. If Atlantis is real, and if it still exists somewhere beneath the depths, then perhaps its presence has already reached us in ways we have not yet understood. Perhaps the ocean has been carrying signals all along. Modern science has begun to listen. Sonar pings sent into the deep return, with patterns that sometimes confuse us. Ridges, plateaus, or structures that look symmetrical, too precise to be natural. Are they artifacts of mapping, or are they hints of something artificial? Oceanographers debate, but the mystery lingers. Sometimes instruments detect magnetic anomalies, fields stronger or stranger than expected. as though something beneath the seafloor is generating energy. Could it be only geology? Or could it be the residue of something human, or more than human? We cannot know, but we keep recording, keep listening, because one day the signal might be clear. There have been moments when the deep has spoken in ways we cannot explain. In 1997, hydrophones in the Pacific recorded a sound unlike anything ever heard before. It was called the bloop, a low, powerful rumble that echoed across thousands of kilometers. At first, some wondered if it came from a massive creature, something beyond our knowledge. Later, scientists suggested it was ice breaking from glaciers. But even with that explanation, the imagination lingers. If the ocean can produce sounds so strange, could some of them not be signs of activity we do not yet understand? Could some of them be signals from places we have not yet found? If a civilization lived beneath the ocean, how would it communicate? Not with radio waves, which fade quickly in water, not with fire or smoke, but with sound. Vibrations can travel farther in the sea than in air. A single low-frequency pulse can cross entire oceans. Whales already use this principle, so might Atlantis. Perhaps their messages ride on frequencies we have heard but not recognized. Perhaps their language is hidden in the hum of the ocean, so vast and slow that to us it sounds like noise. Our instruments might have already recorded it, filed away as anomalies, while to them it is ordinary speech. And then there are lights. Sometimes in the deep, explorers see flashes where there should be none. Bioluminescence explains most of them, but not all. Some divers speak of glows that seem patterned, like signals pulsing in rhythm. In the blackness of the trenches, such lights would be communication, not decoration. Imagine an Atlantean city glowing faintly, its signals flashing across the water like fireflies in the night, unseen by us because we have never looked in the right place. Magnetism, too, holds possibilities. Our world is wrapped in magnetic fields, and the ocean floor itself hums with them. Ships sometimes record distortions. Compasses spin strangely. Instruments lose their bearings. Usually geology explains it. Iron-rich rocks, shifting crust. But if a hidden civilization used energy drawn from the earth itself, it might leave signatures in the field. To us, they would be anomalies. To them, they would be deliberate signals, as natural as our radio towers humming above ground. All of this may sound like speculation, but speculation is only imagination applied to data we do not yet understand. The ocean is filled with anomalies. Most have explanations, but not all. And when we find something we cannot explain, our minds turn to Atlantis. Could it be that the signals are already there, whispering from the deep, and that we are only now learning to hear them? There is also the question of intent. If Atlantis survives, would they want us to hear them, or would they remain silent, hidden behind the shield of the sea? Perhaps the signals we hear are not communication at all, but leakage. The accidental byproducts of a civilization running its energy, moving its vessels, living its life. We might detect them as faint anomalies, but to them they are ordinary. Or perhaps the silence is deliberate. The ocean itself, a cloak. They do not wish to pierce, to remain unseen. They must remain unheard. In that case, what we catch are only accidents. Moments where the deep lets slip what it usually conceals. Listening to the ocean has changed the way we think of it. We no longer see it as empty. We know it is alive with voices, natural, and perhaps more. Hydrophones scattered across the world pick up clicks, rumbles, pulses, all woven into a fabric of sound. We are only beginning to understand. Some of it is seismic, some biological, some mechanical, from our own ships. But within that noise, who is to say there is not also something older, something hidden, something deliberate? The search for Atlantis may not be about finding ruins or stones, but about recognizing patterns and signals we already have. A vibration too regular, a glow too patterned, a magnetic field too precise. These might be the signs of a civilization we cannot see, but which has never been fully silent. Perhaps Plato's story is not just about what was destroyed, but about what continues, speaking to us in the language of the deep. And maybe we are already answering. Our own signals travel into the sea, sonar pings, submarine engines, cables humming with electricity. If Atlantis listens, they already know us. They already hear our presence, clumsy and loud compared to the quiet rhythms of the deep. Perhaps they choose not to respond, or perhaps they respond in ways we do not yet understand. Signals mistaken for noise, waiting for us to learn how to hear. The ocean is not silent, it is speaking. The question is whether we will ever learn the language. And if we do, will we discover that the voices we hear are only wails and earthquakes? Or will we find that one of them belongs to Atlantis, still alive, still sending signals from the deep? Chapter 14. If Atlantis emerged today, imagine it. One morning the news breaks. Sonar scans in the mid-Atlantic reveal unmistakable structures buried beneath the seafloor. Not vague anomalies or blurred outlines, but walls, circles, and temples, arranged in patterns too precise to be natural. Soon deep-sea submersibles descend. Cameras stream live images of stone avenues, carvings half covered in coral, statues tilted in the sand. The world gasps. Atlantis is no longer a myth. It is real, and it has been found. What would happen next? At first, there would be wonder. News anchors would speak breathlessly. Scientists would rush to interpret what they see. For a moment, the whole planet would be united in awe. It would feel like stepping into a dream that has haunted us for millennia. A lost civilization, suddenly revealed, proving that myth and history are not as separate as we thought. Children in classrooms would watch the live feed, their eyes wide, their questions endless. Adults would feel a mixture of excitement and disbelief, as though the line between story and truth had been erased. But soon, the questions would come. Who owns Atlantis? Whose history is it? Which nation, which institution, which culture has the right to claim it? If it lies in international waters, perhaps the United Nations would step in, declaring it a heritage site for all humanity. But would that stop countries from competing, from racing to be first to excavate, to control, to profit? The discovery of Atlantis would not only be about history, it would be about power. Tourism companies would see opportunity. Imagine the advertisements. Submarines offering journeys to see Atlantis with your own eyes. Research institutions would scramble for funding, eager to be the first to publish papers on its architecture, its language, its artifacts. Governments would worry about what lies buried there, metals, energy, or even technologies we do not yet understand. Some would call for protection, others for exploitation. Atlantis would not rise into a quiet world. It would rise into ours, a world driven by curiosity, but also by competition, by commerce, by politics. And then there is the human imagination. The myths of Atlantis are tied to ideas of lost wisdom, lost technology, lost ways of living. If the ruins revealed advanced knowledge, even symbols we cannot understand, the speculation would explode. Some would see it as proof of contact with gods or extraterrestrials. Others would argue it was simply human genius, long forgotten. Conspiracy theories would bloom, each one claiming to know the truth. Atlantis would not just be studied, it would be mythologized all over again. This time in real time, before billions of watching eyes. The scientific community would face both opportunity and challenge. Archaeologists would descend into debates. Is Atlantis a single civilization or a mixture of memories from many drowned cities? Historians would rewrite timelines, asking how this fits into the story of Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley. Linguists would pore over inscriptions, if any are found, trying to link them to known languages or reveal something entirely new. The discovery would not only change history, it would change how we think about ourselves. Because if Atlantis existed, it means we are not the first great experiment of civilization. Others have come before. Others may have been greater than we imagine. But what if the discovery revealed more than ruins? What if evidence suggested survival? Anomalies in signals, strange patterns of energy, even traces of habitation, not entirely ancient. The world would not know how to react. Some would celebrate, some would fear. Governments would prepare for contact, cautious and secretive, while the public would be torn between awe and suspicion. The idea of an advanced people hidden beneath the sea for millennia would challenge everything we believe about history, about human evolution, about our place in the world. If Atlantis emerged today, it would also be a mirror. We would be forced to ask how we compare. Plato said Atlantis fell because of arrogance, because it reached too far. Would we look at ourselves and see the same? Rising seas, warming climate, cities threatened by water. The parallels are uncomfortable. Finding Atlantis might be less about them and more about us. It would remind us that no civilization is invincible, not even ours. It would force us to ask, are we repeating their story? And perhaps that is the most powerful part of the thought experiment. If Atlantis rose now, it would not just rewrite the past, it would warn the present. We would see in their ruins our own reflection, a people who thought their world was permanent, until it wasn't. Their stone rings buried in sand might echo the towers of our cities, vulnerable to storms, to floods, to the same forces of nature. Atlantis would be a reminder that history is fragile, that progress can vanish, that memory can drown. Yet there would also be hope. If Atlantis endured in any way, then survival is possible even in catastrophe. Their adaptation, whether through scattering across the world or hiding beneath the sea, would show resilience. It would tell us that collapse is not the end, that something always carries forward. And if we are wise, we might learn from them, not only about the past, but about how to face our own future. To imagine Atlantis emerging today is to imagine humanity confronted with its oldest dream and its deepest fear. It is awe and anxiety blended together. It is the thrill of discovery and the weight of responsibility. The ocean has always been our shield and our mystery, but if it finally revealed Atlantis, we would stand at a crossroads. Would we honor it, protect it, learn from it? Or would we repeat the arrogance that Plato warned about, consuming it, exploiting it, until nothing remained? Perhaps this is why the myth endures, because it is not really about an island at all. It is about us, about what we would do if faced with the unknown, about whether we can learn from the past, or whether we are destined to repeat it. If Atlantis emerged today, it would not just be a city rising from the sea. It would be a mirror rising before us, showing us who we are and who we might become. Chapter 15. Lessons from a Lost Civilization. Whenever we speak of Atlantis, we cannot help but turn the story inward. Whether it was real or not, whether it lies beneath the Atlantic or only in Plato's imagination, the myth carries lessons. They are not lessons about maps or ruins or sonar scans, but about us, about what civilizations are, how they rise, and how they fall. In Atlantis, we see the shadow of ourselves, and in their loss we glimpse the possibilities of our future. The first lesson is that greatness is fragile. Plato described Atlantis as rich beyond measure, fertile, resourceful, powerful. Its people built canals, temples, and cities that surpassed those of his own time. They mastered their environment, drew wealth from the land, and grew so strong that they sought to rule beyond their island. Yet it all ended in a single day and night. Whether or not the timeline is literal, the message is clear. No matter how advanced a society becomes, it is never immune to collapse. Nature is greater than us, and the earth will always remind us of that truth. Earthquakes, floods, eruptions, rising seas, they care nothing for power or pride. Civilizations that forget this balance are always at risk. The second lesson is about hubris. Plato makes it explicit. Atlantis fell because its people grew arrogant. For generations, they lived in balance with their land, respecting the gods and their limits. But over time, greed grew. They sought to expand, to conquer, to take more than they needed. This is not only Plato's story, it is the rhythm of history. Rome overextended. The Maya overexploited their forests. Industrial societies today burn fossil fuels beyond the capacity of the earth to absorb. The story of Atlantis is the story of forgetting humility. It is the reminder that power without restraint leads to ruin. The third lesson is that collapse does not erase memory, but it does transform it. If Atlantis was real, its ruins may lie beneath waves, covered in sand and coral. But the story endures. It has been retold for thousands of years, shaping philosophy, literature, and imagination. Even destroyed civilizations live on in the memories of those who come after. The Maya, the Khmer, the Mesopotamians, all gone as empires, but alive in ruins, in stories, in lessons. Atlantis is the most powerful example of this truth, that even in loss, there is survival of another kind. The civilization may fall, but its story becomes immortal. The fourth lesson is resilience. Atlantis fell, perhaps some survived. They may have scattered across the world, carrying fragments of knowledge that seeded other cultures. This possibility is more symbolic than proven, but the symbolism matters. It reminds us that collapse is never absolute. People adapt. They migrate. They find new ways to live. Even if the island was swallowed, humanity itself carried forward. That is as true now as it was then. We may face crises, climate, war, resource exhaustion, but history suggests we endure. Atlantis becomes not only a story of loss, but of continuation. The fifth lesson is about the ocean itself. In Plato's time, the sea was a barrier, a destroyer, an unknown. To us, it is still partly the same. We have mapped the stars more thoroughly than the seafloor. We invest billions in reaching Mars while ignoring the mysteries beneath our waves. Atlantis reminds us that the ocean is not emptiness, but history. Beneath its surface lie ruins, landscapes, and perhaps entire stories of humanity we have not yet uncovered. To seek Atlantis is to remind ourselves that we are not finished exploring our own planet. The greatest mysteries may still lie under our feet. There is also a lesson in myth itself, whether Atlantis was real or not. Its story has shaped how we think for thousands of years. Myths carry truth, even when they are not factual. They warn, inspire, and guide. Atlantis warns us of arrogance. It inspires us to search. It guides us to question our own fragility. In this way, it is less important whether the island existed than whether we listen to the story it tells. Some of the lessons are warnings. If we ignore the balance of nature, we risk the same fate. If we grow too proud, we may collapse. If we build without humility, the earth will take back what we have made. But some of the lessons are hopeful. Collapse is not the end. Survival continues. Memory persists. Even ruins teach us. Even myths remind us. If Atlantis still lives only in story, then the story itself is a gift, one that has carried wisdom across centuries. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Atlantis is that civilization is not a straight line upward. We imagine ourselves as the pinnacle, the most advanced, the most enduring, but Atlantis tells us we are part of a cycle. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall. If one before us was greater, then we are not alone at the peak. We are part of a longer story, one with many chapters still unwritten. And if one before us fell, then we too can fall. That is both humbling and liberating. It means our time is not guaranteed, but it also means we can choose differently. When we imagine Atlantis, we are imagining a mirror. We are asking, will we suffer the same fate? Will our cities be remembered as theirs are, as ruins beneath waves, as myths told by future generations? Or will we learn? Will we take the lessons seriously? Will we choose a path of balance rather than hubris? Atlantis cannot answer that for us. It can only remind us that the choice is ours, and always has been, and maybe that is why the story has endured for so long. It is not simply curiosity about a lost island. It is the recognition that Atlantis is about humanity itself. The people of that lost world are us. across time. Their pride is our pride. Their fall could be our fall. Their survival could be our survival. If we listen carefully, Atlantis is not whispering about a past that is gone. It is speaking to the present, warning us, guiding us, offering us a chance to see ourselves before it is too late. Atlantis may or may not exist beneath the sea, but the lessons of Atlantis exist, here and now. Greatness is fragile. Hubris destroys. Memory survives. Collapse is transformation, not only ending but also beginning. These are the truths that echo across time, and if we are wise, we will hear them. Chapter 16. The civilization that might still breathe. If Atlantis is only myth, then it belongs to history books and philosophy. But if Atlantis still exists, even now, then the story is not over. It is not just a tale of collapse, but of survival. To imagine this is to stretch our minds beyond what we think possible. It is to picture a civilization older than any empire we know, hidden for millennia, adapting in silence, building a life that continues in ways beyond our imagination. Could such a thing be true? Could Atlantis still breathe beneath the ocean's vast shield, alive and waiting? The idea may seem impossible, but history reminds us that survival often hides in plain sight. For thousands of years, there were tribes in rainforests, deserts, and mountains untouched by empires, living as they always had. While Rome rose and fell, while dynasties changed in China, while kingdoms shifted in Africa, whole peoples remained outside, unseen, continuing their ways of life in parallel. If that can happen on the surface, why not beneath the sea? If remote valleys and forests can shield entire cultures, then surely the ocean, vaster than all of them combined, could shelter a world we have yet to discover. For Atlantis to endure, it would have needed to adapt. A surface city would not last unchanged under the waves. But civilizations do not stay still. They evolve with their environments. An Atlantean society that sank into the sea would not remain the same as it was in Plato's dialogues. It would have changed, slowly, profoundly, until its people became something new. Perhaps they learned to live in caverns carved beneath the seabed, using geothermal heat to survive. Perhaps they cultivated algae and fungi as food, glowing bioluminescent organisms to provide light. Perhaps they built their homes with coral and stone, shaping them not as rigid towers, but as living structures grown into place. Their world might not look like ours at all, yet it would still be human ingenuity, shaped by necessity, transformed by time. How would they see us? To them, we might seem fragile, living exposed to storms and wars, dependent on the unstable balance of the surface. They might look at our cities and see not permanence, but risk. Towers waiting to be swept away by floods, fields vulnerable to drought. To them, their own hidden world might feel safer, steadier, shielded by the ocean. They may not envy us. They may not seek contact. They may prefer their silence, their separation, the security of being unseen. If Atlantis still breathes, perhaps it is by choice that it remains hidden. But the possibility lingers that they might one day reveal themselves, or that we might stumble upon them. What would that encounter look like? It would be the meeting of two branches of humanity, long divided, shaped by environments so different that each would seem alien to the other. Our technology is driven by fire, electricity, and machines. Theirs might be driven by pressure, currents, and biology. Our architecture reaches for the sky. Theirs would sink into stone and coral. Our time is measured by the sun. Theirs would be measured by tides and the rhythms of the earth itself. To us, they would look like another species. To them, we might look reckless and crude, and yet beneath the differences, both would be human, connected by a root older than history. If Atlantis breathes, then the story of civilization is far older and richer than we think. It would mean we are not the first to rise, not the first to build, not the first to imagine greatness. It would mean history is not a straight line but a branching tree with paths we never knew existed. It would mean that humanity has already survived collapse once before, carrying on in silence. Proving resilience we rarely credit ourselves with. That thought alone is powerful. Even without proof. It reminds us that survival is not bound to one way of living, that human creativity can find a path even in the darkest depths. And what of the lessons they might carry? If Atlantis still exists, their wisdom would be unlike ours. They would know how to live without sunlight, how to grow food without soil, how to build without steel or wood. They would know patience, the slow rhythm of tides instead of the frantic pace of surface empires. They would know humility, the awareness that collapse is always possible, that survival requires balance. To meet them would not only be to discover ruins, but to discover ourselves, in a form we did not know we could take. Perhaps that is why the idea of Atlantis enduring fascinates us so deeply, because it suggests that we are not alone in our struggle to balance pride and survival, that somewhere, hidden, another civilization already faced these questions and found answers, that their answers might help us face our own crises, rising seas, shifting climates, the fragility of our own towers and cities. If they still breathe, then their survival is not only theirs, it is also hope for us. Even if Atlantis does not exist as a living world, the idea of it teaches us something important. It teaches us that we are drawn to stories of survival, not just destruction, that we long to believe civilizations can endure even when the surface world falls apart. Atlantis endures because it offers that possibility, the whisper that collapse is not the end, that life can continue in hidden ways. And so long as we believe that, Atlantis breathes, at least in our imagination. But imagination is not nothing. It shapes how we see ourselves, how we plan, how we dream. If Atlantis still breathes, then we too can enough. If they found ways to endure beneath the waves, then we can find ways to endure the storms of our time. In the end, whether Atlantis is real or not, matters less than the story we take from it. For the story tells us we are resilient. It tells us we are not as fragile as we fear. It tells us that even when civilizations fall, humanity continues. So we return to the question that began this journey. What if Atlantis still exists? The answer is both simple and profound. If it does, then the story of civilization is not finished. If it does not, then the story still lives in us, shaping how we think and reminding us of what is at stake. Either way, Atlantis still breathes, in memory, in imagination, and perhaps in silence beneath the sea.